So we are going to jump right into our speakers today. So we're starting today in the electrical field. So Jan Stranz was the former VP of Member Services with Oconto Electric Cooperative. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see her as she is speaking today. So Jan, tell us a little bit about the electrical field.
Well, good morning. Thank you and welcome to all. It's so exciting to know that there are students interested in these types of fields and career options. So I'm happy to speak with you today and be with you. I'd like to share with you a little bit about the electric utility industry and maybe how that ties into things like agriculture and natural resources and those sorts of things. You will, if you think about it, you can understand that electricity is very pervasive, if you will, in our economy. There really isn't a job anymore that does not either relate to or use electric energy. And you'll hear about more about that from other aspects of that utility industry. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about what my career has been. Electricity first started being used in a widespread manner 100 some years ago in the early 1900s. And it was revolutionary at that time. It changed the way so many things were done in industry, residential use, and on farms. And my utility career began about 40 years ago in Western Wisconsin. I was one of Wisconsin's first residential energy auditors, which meant I visited homes and small businesses and advised people on how to use electric energy more efficiently and also how to use natural gas more efficiently. In those days, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was somewhat of a resurgence of interest in trying to promote solar energy, both for passive heating and also as a source for producing electricity. So I'll touch on a little bit of that in my career as I go forward. When I first began working, I mentioned that I was a residential energy auditor, and so I would visit homes and businesses and inspect various aspects of their homes. I was in my mid-20s at that time, and one of the things that helped me to get that particular position, I did not have a college degree, but I had probably the equivalent of a technical school degree, and I had a lot of training in architecture, mathematics, physics, those types of things, just as where my career began. Eventually, I started working in more policy with the utility in Western Wisconsin and working with groups that would work with the state of Wisconsin in developing rates and policies in particular in order to conserve energy. Eventually, when I moved to Western Wisconsin and began working with Oconto Electric Cooperative, being that it was a much smaller utility, I was much less of a specialist than at that point and had to do a multitude of tasks, which I very much enjoyed. I continued with the energy use piece, rate structures. One of my first projects, a bigger project, was working with farm members with what was at the time called stray voltage issues. There were some things going on electrically on farms that were damaging to animals. And it was a position and a duty that was trying to be the bridge between what's happening and how can it get resolved. And is it a farm issue? Is it a utility issue? Whatever it is. But that was a big project at that time. That was followed shortly after with a hydro licensing project. Oconto Electric Co-op owns and operates the small hydroelectric dam on the Oconto River at Stiles, Wisconsin. And the license originally was a 50-year license, and it was going to expire. So I spent probably a good share of about 5 years working on that relicensing project with state authorities and also federal authorities. It's a nice little operation. It was then, and it still is. It's certainly a renewable energy project. The water falling through the turbines in that powerhouse is the energy that is used to produce electricity. I also worked in more recent years with policies and projects that would take into account more technology. So for example, at one point, a number of years ago now, virtually every meter, and there are 10,000 meters at Oconto Electric, give or take, meters can be read remotely using a signal that is carried on the power line. And a signal is sent back to the cooperative or the utility that shows what the the energy use has been in that period and even in current time. That technology then is interpreted in many platforms, including a platform where consumers can go to a particular app and look up their energy use for the past whatever period of time they like, even down to hourly energy use. So it's a really, it was a lot of changes that happened during my career. One of the other things too is during all of these things, everything that a utility does, cooperative, the state and federal authorities have a lot of safeguards in place, and those are things that have to be known by people who work in the industry. So get to my notes here. As I went through my career then with Oconto Electric, my typical day would begin with a set of tasks in mind, but that did not necessarily mean that those were the tasks that would be done. One of the things that was not a frequent change in plans, but certainly can happen in electric utilities, is there might be a big power outage. I want to share with you an example. A few years ago, well, and CISA still has a project where teachers are placed in industries during the summer to get an idea of what industry needs are relevant to the topics that they teach. So in this case, a 7th grade math teacher was assigned to be with me for about a week. And on her first day, on a Monday morning, over the weekend, there'd been a really big storm and there were a lot of outages and a lot of things going on. So she phoned me and said, do you want me to come in now or should I wait and reschedule? And I said, no, why don't you come on in? This is part of what the day looks like. This is part of what we do. So it was interesting to be able to look at how a day can change for a utility employee when something like an outage occurs. So that particular outage was big. It was a big storm. You'll recall that from a few summers ago. But she later told me that it was very helpful to see that. And in fact, she was very helpful with us at the electric co-op in trying to sort things out and figure out all that had to happen to get power back on. And of course, the linemen are the ones on point in a case like that, as well as a dispatcher, to be out fixing lines. But there's an awful lot of work that goes on behind the scenes too, from tracking where the outages are. One dispatcher has a hard time handling all of that, but technology makes it easier. So all employees go into a power restoration mode. And if the outage gets longer, it even includes trying to figure out how to feed the crews who are out in the field. So a lot of things going on, and it was an interesting experience both for the teacher intern and for me that day. Some of the careers at the electric co-op include like line worker. That's one of the more popular ones. And along with that, there are some related occupations, including people who trim trees and cut brush to make way for power lines and to clear areas so that the power lines can be safely operated. And of course, a dispatcher to take care of where the jobs, what's going on with the line crew and being that link back to a central station. A meter technician now is somebody who rarely goes out to read a meter, but I mentioned about the technology that's used now to track meter readings and energy use and to be able to convert those readings into a billing system so that in fact, the company can get paid for the services it provides. Also at the electric co-op, there are a couple of different types of engineers, an electrical engineer for one. Another is what would be called a staking engineer, technician who plans jobs and gets them ready for building. There is an electrician on staff working with customer members on things like dual fuel and heating projects, and actually too is metering that would accommodate solar or wind energy. Speaking of solar wind energy too, it isn't just something that can happen right away. Somebody gets an idea and says, let's add that to our mix of things that we offer. There's a lot of back work that goes to that, including policies and rates that will accommodate that. So it makes sense for the member user, the consumer, and it also has to make sense for the utility. And all of those, of course, within regulations, in this case, that come from the state. There's also an energy use engineer who is a specialist in knowing how energy is used and can help consumers understand what their bill means, what they're doing, how much power their appliances or equipment use, and to help them understand that so they can use electric energy more efficiently. There's also a mechanic who manages the fleet. Even in a small company like Oconto Electric Co-op, there are lots and lots of vehicles that need to be maintained. And there is a fleet manager who is also a mechanic who handles those duties. There are also a handful of other related office type jobs that support all of these types of things. If I were to give you a piece of advice, I would say keep your options open. Make sure if you're interested in this type of career that you look at classes like mathematics, physics, engineering. And when I say those things, it doesn't mean you have to be at a level that is a frightening level. It means pay attention to those things and also pay attention to your reading and writing skills. And I don't need to have to tell students to look at technology. Technology is going to be used no matter what you're doing. And that can be a lot of fun. I had a great career. I enjoyed every piece of it. And I hope some of you will be interested in seeking out a career in the electric utility industry.
Great. You started touching on exactly what I was going to ask about as far as training to prepare for a career in electrical utilities. Do you know, are there any like technical college programs that are specific to the electrical utilities?
Yes, there are. And there are, in fact, at Oconto Electric Co-op and probably at bigger utilities too, there's an expectation that incoming employees would have, if they want to be a line worker in particular, would do a class. I think it's some of the tech college people could help me with the name of it, but I believe it's a power distribution course that typically is a minimum. And oftentimes new linemen come in close to journey level, even past an apprentice level. So maybe have worked with a contractor or somebody else. But for somebody to come actually directly, say, out of high school into line work is probably rare at this point.
Mm-hmm. Great. The other thing you also touched on wind energy and solar energy. Do you have an idea of like what percentage of energy they were getting from those renewable resources at Oconto Electric?
The amount from the hydro plant was probably, well, when we've had some high water years now, it's probably been about 5%. It's not a big percentage, but it's a good, solid, economical, environmentally friendly source. And it's kind of neat. As far as the amount that comes from individuals, it's at this point is quite scattered. So there isn't a lot, but there have been just recently announced regulations or rules from the state that by some year, into the future, maybe 20 years, a much bigger percentage of power overall, even from central station generating, will need to come from renewable sources.
Awesome. Allison, do you have any questions?
I think just what did you like most about your very great career? But what's one thing that sticks out?
I like the variety. There certainly would be daily tasks, and eventually as I got into management, there were certain things that, the more, I'll say, mundane things, things that had to be done recurring. But I always enjoyed the new projects that came out, and that's something I'd advise students. You may want to find out what the term project management means. So even if you are not managing a particular project, which I had the privilege to do in many cases, but even if you're not yet the manager of the project, to know how project management works, I think would be a real beneficial thing for you to work within an organization.